sometimes I wish that Steven Universe didn't get as popular as it did. Sure, its large fan base is what got me to really start watching it in the first place, and the show may not still be on today without as many viewers as it has, but like literally everything that gets popular, Steven Universe has had a lot of criticism thrown at it as of late. Some of it is kind of unwarranted, but I've seen quite a few good points made about the series that aren't entirely positive. Many of these negative comments I can understand, but I don't really agree with many of them. Take the point that the series' tendency to not have characters be at a set height and frequently go off model is distracting and unpolished. I think it's a valid criticism, but personally I don't feel that it holds much ground when deciding the quality of the show. It isn't something that I notice when watching episodes, and hardly ever brings me out of the experience. Plus, the loose character designs have created a lot of really great expressions and poses, and it can even add a good extra bit of humor at times. But there is one piece of criticism aimed at this show that I always come back to, one that I've thought a lot about, and which most of this video is built around. Steven Universe isn't as good as it used to be. I've seen this comment or variations on it pop up numerous times on the web around the past couple of months, and have heard that recently quite a few people have lost interest in the show. Even I'm not as excited about new episodes of the show as I used to be. A year ago, just about everything said about Steven Universe was mostly positive, but now that really isn't the case. If I have to mark a general point when people said that the show began to get worse, it was sometime during season 4, and that's where we're going to start. I've rewatched the season all the way through, and have been able to solidify my opinion on it. To say the least, it's not exactly what you think it would be. And before you ask, yes, I am at a beach. Rehoboth Beach in Delaware to be exact. I bring attention to this because it's actually one of the beaches that inspired the central location of Steven Universe, Beach City. They've got a Funland amusement park, frying pizza shops right alongside each other, teacup and spaceship rides, and I know none of you really care about that, so without further ado, let's have a look at Season 4, and see if Steven Universe has really gone downhill. Now, before we jump into the opening episodes, it's important to remember what happened during the tail end of Season 3. We saw the return and end of Bismuth, Smoky Quartz' debut, Jasper's corruption, and a return to space where we learn that Rose Quartz may not be as perfect as we thought she was. So much happens in those final 5 episodes, and then it's followed up with the Kindergarten Kid, where all of the excitement and intrigue built up in those episodes kind of drops off. It's not a bad episode, and it has a few problems that are all its own, but it's kind of a letdown considering what came before it. Unlike Full Disclosure and Super Watermelon Island, which both do a pretty good job carrying over the energy and excitement from the previous season finales, The Kindergarten Kid is kind of its own thing. The plot loosely connects to the episode Beta, in how the gems are wrangling up the corrupted gems gathered by Jasper throughout Season 3. But this is a Peridot episode, and not one of her best ones at that. I thought the emphasis on how the mind of a corrupted gem works was interesting, but there wasn't very much of it, and most of the episode is a Looney Tunes tribute that I think falls flat. It tries to be like the Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote shorts, but it doesn't do a good job imitating their legendary slapstick. We see Peridot get smoshed and crushed over and over again, but she doesn't suffer any injuries.
Peridots are tougher than we look.
There aren't any consequences or impact of Peridot's failures. She just moves on to attempting the next trap with little setbacks. To reuse a quote from my last video, it's slapstick but without the slap. The Kindergarten Kid is a simple and harmless episode, but it has nothing going for it, especially not as a season premiere. I'm far from a fan of Super Watermelon Island, but that at least has a really cool fight scene, even if it is a disappointing episode on the whole. Outside of a few sparks of interesting ideas, The Kindergarten Kid is just a mediocre episode, but thankfully, things definitely pick up from here. The next 5 episodes are a mix between Gem and Beach City human episodes, and they're all pretty good at the very least. Know Your Fusion is a much better season opener than the actual season opener, as it follows up on something from the previous episodes that we actually care about. I like seeing 2 fusions that we rarely see on their own actually interact with each other, and I also liked how the episode was spent on a talk show set, which for being Sardonyx' gem room makes total sense. I also enjoyed that the challenges Smoky Quartz was put through were callbacks, because as the episode even says,
Everybody loves a callback.
Know Your Fusion did hammer in the point that Smokey was a unique fusion nearly to the point of annoyance, but for me, it didn't hurt the quality of the episode. If anything got on my nerves, it was the large amount of bad puns made. We get it, talk shows can be super cheesy, but you don't have to follow in their footsteps to tell me that.
I'm just one big super wrong, good for nothing dud with a yo-yo.
Jeez, this bad laugh track makes me feel like I'm watching insert bad sitcom with an annoying laugh track of your choice here. Cody's Book is an episode that I have mixed feelings on. I like how it revisits a lot of gem locations, foreshadows the upcoming storyline, has a few good comedic moments, and strengthens the connection between Lion and Rose, one that I'm surprised is still kind of flimsy this far into the series. But these interesting tidbits are only sprinkled into an episode that is just okay. Steven and Connie are reading a secret journal Steven conveniently found by the old sailor Buddy Budwick, who the duo imagines as Jamie. Jamie is a minor character I can't get enough of, but truthfully I wasn't the biggest fan of his inclusion in this episode. He didn't add the amount of comedy into it that I expected from him, and it makes me ask why he even needed to be playing Buddy in the first place, other than to reference historical friction. The end of season 4 kind of sets a precedent that the series is going to focus more and more on intergalactic adventures, which probably means we'll be seeing less Beach City Citizen episodes. But I hope we get at least one more Jamie episode. He deserves a proper send-off. Moving on, Mindful Education really ups the ante and is one of the standout episodes of the season. It deals with Connie and Steven learning to let go of their lingering feelings of guilt and confusion during fusion, which leads to Steven dealing with the violent back-to-back defeats of Bismuth, Jasper, and the Rubies. Part of me wishes that this was the season 4 premiere, so that it had the impact that Full Disclosure had when coming after Jailbreak. But having episodes pass between this and the end of season 3 shows that Steven has tried to repress his guilt for events that he wasn't responsible for, and I think that makes this episode a lot more interesting. Making it even better is the song Here Comes a Thought. It's rather simple but also very calming, and fits the tone of the fusion zen zone that it is used in. I used to love the use of color in the sequence that accompanies the song. The white butterflies used to represent the distracting thoughts of the characters stand out really well among the shades of blue found in the zone. The only annoyance I have with the episode is the guest animation by Studio Trigger's Takafumi Hora. I really hope I'm pronouncing that right. It just looks like a slower version of the regular animation style, and it really just distracted me. I don't hate it, but I just think it looked a bit odd and wasn't really needed. The visuals that accompany Here Comes a Thought in particular look really odd, but that makes it even weirder that Hora storyboarded parts of the entire episode, so I really have no idea why this one section looks so strange. Whatever, Mindful Education still has some great themes and music, and I would give a thought about seeing it. Future Boy Zoltron is as good as an episode about Steven acting as a fortune teller is going to get. It's a fun episode that gives Mr. Smiley a backstory. It's a somewhat bland backstory, but hey, it adds an extra dimension to a character who previously had none. Plus, it's got a few good moments of humor, a really cool way of showing Garnet's future vision in action, a rather touching ending, and even a reference to OKKO with its arcade machine. And yes, I checked the arcade in the real-life Beach City. Sadly, it doesn't actually exist. This is one of the weirder Steven Universe episodes that we've had. It involves Pearl's attempts to be cool, leading her to follow around a girl who looks like Rose, and end up in a chase scene with a police car as garage rock or power pop music plays in the background. Somehow, all these weird ideas come together to form a really charming and fun Pearl episode. Even though I'd rather see Pearl get more character development, since she's arguably the most similar to how she was at the start of the show, but I found her attempts to impress Steven and Amethyst to be really charming, and go into a part of her characters that, while rather shallow, is something I don't believe another episode has developed. The music and fast action do a really good job of capturing the feeling of going on a joyride with a couple of friends. In particular, the use of the tracks 15 Minutes and I'm a Star by Mike Kroll from his album I Hate Jazz.
I hate jazz.
Create an atmosphere unique to this episode, when combined with the character banter that we're used to. Despite being a combination of many weird ideas, Last One Out of Beach City manages to not feel out of place from the rest of the series, and is one episode I really want to come back to over and over again. I've been fairly positive throughout this video, but I'm not going to sugarcoat this. Onion Gang is a really bad episode. It doesn't even feel like a Steven Universe episode. It's an episode of a preschool show with an extremely simple lesson, a boring story, and characters that barely have any character. There's only 3 characters that speak in the entire episode: Steven, Garbanzo, and Suitcase Sam. Garbanzo only ever says his name, and all that Suitcase Sam says is this. The episode kind of puts a handicap on itself, since it can't have a complicated story or message because basically only one character can speak, Suitcase Sam's line notwithstanding. Steven is also really flanderized in this episode. He's always been a sensitive kid.
Just today you were crying about snakes.
They don't have any arms.
But here he takes everything that Onion's friends do super seriously. Steven thinks of crushing a bug to be some sort of sin against humanity, and is seriously concerned for someone who fell down and sprayed ketchup over himself. There isn't even a conflict in this episode. Sure, Steven is weirded out by some of the stuff that Onion and his gang do, but he never consults them about it. He just runs away, and by the time he returns, whoops, the episode's over. Boy, watching that episode sure was a great use of my time. I can find some good out of just about every single Steven Universe episode I've seen, but not this one. Onion Gang is half boring, half infuriating, and completely awful. I would wholeheartedly recommend that you skip this episode, but it's actually a bit important to this season's plot. Yes, I'm being 100% serious. We'll get to it when we get to it.
We've got a special half-hour episode of Steven Universe! We've got 4 dogs! Just kidding, that's a pumpkin! All of this and more when you tune into new episodes Thursday at 6.
One thing I really like about Steven Universe is how it actually makes an effort to show time passing and seasons changing in universe. I can't think of any other cartoon that does this to the extent that this show does, and I'm glad that Season 3 continues to do this with Gem Harvest and 3 Gems and a Baby. Gem Harvest is a fall/Thanksgiving episode and the first 2-parter in the season. We're introduced to Greg's brother Andy, who's both confused and angry over how Greg left his family for roses. Andy has spent many years traveling the world on his own, and this experience has isolated him and made him accustomed to his life and family. So when people and things he's known for years are suddenly turned upside down, it's hard for him to accept and adjust to them. Uncle Andy could have just been a straw man who can't accept change, but he's given motivations and actions that show that he's just a confused man living in a world completely new to him. And for me, that makes him a pretty compelling character. Outside of Andy, Gem Harvest brings all of the crystal gems together. They have some nice banter with each other, especially during the reference-filled dinner sequence, which does a fantastic job communicating Andy's confusion. As longtime viewers get all of the references made about gem lore and culture, while anyone else new to this world, like Andy is, won't understand a thing the characters are saying. It's pretty genius when you think about it. The only problem I have with Gem Harvest is that the plot only starts 5 minutes into the episode. Prior to that is a sequence where Steven helps Peridot and Lapis grow crops, which leads to a pumpkin being brought to life. Outside of a really dark but hilarious scene where Pumpkin watches as Steven cuts into another pumpkin, complete with distorted music, which causes Pumpkin to leave Steven in favor of Peridot and Lapis, this plotline never really goes anywhere. Pumpkin doesn't add much to the episode, and it makes these opening minutes seem kind of like filler. Gem Harvest is still a good episode though. It's a relatable and somewhat tragic story with some nice interactions, but it won't blow anyone's minds. 3 Gems and a Baby is on a similar level to Gem Harvest. It's not the best flashback episode, We Need to Talk is still the king, but it's an interesting look into raising a child, and how confusing that can be for someone new to it. This isn't really something that I can relate to, but the episode gets the viewer to understand how the characters feel about the situation through moments like Greg's song, which is very nice and peaceful by the way, and the gifts that the gems give baby Steven.
Is some kind of kid's book? Oh, a dictionary.
The episode also has an advantage over a few others because it's set during a snowstorm, and like Winter Forecast before it, it emulates the feeling of being trapped inside during a storm really well. This show really needs more episodes set in the winter, as the atmosphere of the series has been at its best during those episodes. 3 Gems and a Baby is a pretty funny episode too, with many of its highlights coming from Amethyst's attempts to understand Steven. Oh, and this story hinted to during the final lines of the episode.
It wasn't such a big deal when that teenage girl kidnapped Steven.
That was his babysitter. She took him to the park. You really scared her when you threw that jungle gym at her.
I really want to see that become a full flashback episode someday. I was honestly surprised at how good this episode was when I came back to review it. I didn't remember it being as entertaining and heartwarming as it was, and overall, I think it's one of the best episodes in the season. But if you want more great episodes, look no further than the Zoo arc. It's a string of 5 episodes that tell the adventures of the gems in space as they try to rescue Greg after he's abducted by Blue Diamond and put in Pink Diamond Zoo. This is one of my favorite arcs the series has done, since it's solid almost all the way through. Steven's dream sets up everything extremely well, and also has a couple of plot-important callbacks to Buddy's book and Gem Harvest. Steven adopting an intense interest for discovering his mother's past is a great breath of fresh air from his tendency to just go with the flow that we've seen in almost every previous episode. Adventures in Light Distortion offers some fantastic visuals and a powerful sequence where Steven gives a great monologue while traveling through space a million miles a minute. This episode is probably the weakest of the bunch, as the plot is a bit too simple. Not only do I feel like there should have been more to the story in general, but the conflict could have been resolved if the gems just listened to Peridot for an extra second. I know that Steven was rushing them to keep moving, but I hate that the plot of the episode relied on such a flimsy premise. I hate it whenever a plot like this is used, and this episode isn't an exception to that, though it has enough good bits to it that I can still enjoy it despite that. Gem Heist is a bit better, though it's kind of a slow transition episode, as the gems go undercover to escort Steven into the zoo. I really liked how rude and obviously racist the new character Holy Blue Agate was. She's enjoyably cruel, and it's even more enjoyable to see her get her comeuppance in the final episode of the arc. The Zoo is a really interesting episode that looks into how one's lifestyle can affect their view of freedom in their life. The inhabitants of the zoo are handed literally everything to them, and get little say in how they live, but they're happy with that, and problems only occur when they're given choices to make. It's kind of a different take on Andy's plotline in Gem Harvest, as both feature characters trying to deal with new choices and environments. These themes are much more prominent in the zoo, and I enjoyed this episode's takes on those topics so much that I almost wish we got to see the aftermath of what happened at the zoo after Greg and Steven escaped. I mean, if Centipedal can come back, then why not the Zoomans too? One more thing to add is that I'm a little confused as to what the purpose of the zoo is. You never see any gems observing the humans through a glass window, or any gem scientists making observations about them from afar. I would have liked it if there was more of a reason for the zoo, besides that collecting humans was a really weird hobby that Pink Diamond had. Hopefully we'll eventually get some closure on this question, but until then, it's a small plot hole. Anyway, the zoo arc concludes with That Will Be All, which is almost packed to the seams with great moments. I liked Amethyst bonding with the other Amethyst. Yellow Diamond's song is powerful, but also humanizes the diamonds, and shows that both of them are sad about the shattering of Pink Diamond, though they may show it in different ways, and the scene where the gems slowly escape onto their ship is both super intense and hilarious. The zoo arc has a problem or two, and I favor some of its chapters over others, but it's a really fun set of episodes, even if it doesn't have much else to do with the rest of the season. The zoo arc brings us a little more than halfway through the season, which I think is a good place for me to wrap up this video. Yes, this is going to be a two-parter, but I'm only splitting this video up so that I can work on other projects in between, and so you don't have to wait 1 month for a single video. But before I do that, let's have a look at the set of 5 shorts that were released when the season was airing, which are all based around technology. The first is a YouTube cooking show by Steven that is played almost completely straight, and is kinda boring for that reason. The second is the Gems and Connie singing the song from Sadie's song. It has some nice singing and character. The third is a reaction video where Steven reacts to an episode of Crying Breakfast Friends. I usually find reaction videos kind of boring. Like, usually it's just one guy staring down the camera for most of the video, or trying to milk the most out of a small moment of interest, and most of the viewers care more about what's being reacted to rather than the reactions themselves. But Steven's reactions are very over-exaggerated and actually entertaining, unlike 95% of the reaction video community. This makes the short enjoyable and a good parody of the culture the show has found itself in. The fourth short is a song by Steven, where he basically spills all of his feelings on his purpose and legacy, which is everything that drives this arc during this season. Even though it doesn't have any fancy visuals or a great backing track, this song is really great, and probably my favorite that Steven has sung in this series thus far. The final short is a Skype call between Steven and Peridot, and it leads to Lapis almost thinking that Steven is trapped in the computer like she was, which is sweet. I'd say that all these shorts are nice. Having most of them be based around different kinds of YouTube videos didn't bother me, since all the characters still acted like I would expect them to act, and more focus was put on the characters rather than the tech itself. Even if they all aren't anything special, I'm glad that we got to see the characters hang out and be themselves, as that's something we don't really get to see much of on the show anymore. If you enjoy seeing that as well, then I recommend these shorts. If not, then you can just ignore them. You certainly won't find the reason why many believe that Steven Universe is going downhill here. In fact, outside of one bad and one mediocre episode, I haven't seen much of a reason at all as to why people have dropped off the show. But maybe we'll find some answers in part 2. Until then, I'm Nicktendo, and hey! Get out of the frame! I know you can't hear me, but move it! Also, from now on, I'm going to end my YouTube videos like Steven ends his.
Okay, I love you. Bye.
Hey there, have you heard about the infamous Gem War? Well, it all started long before I was born. Thousands of years of fighting to protect the human race. It's been pretty tough keeping up the pace. I sure have made my fair share of mistakes. I didn't know that rose quartz was such a big deal. There are some wounds that even healing powers can't heal.